According to the Proto-Orthodox hypothesis, Marcion's gospel is an abridgment of canonical Luke. If that were true, then what we should see is consistency between the patterns, the quantitative data patterns in Marcion's gospel and the quantitative data patterns in canonical Luke, because an abridgment is basically going to have the same stylistic or stylometric characteristics that its original longer text would have. But if Marcion's gospel is an earlier form of the Gospel of Luke, then one way of evaluating that or testing that is whether it has divergent or highly different statistical patterns. And one way to evaluate statistical significance and divergences, meaningful differences between two data samples, is to use chi-squared test results. We've been encouraged to run these kinds of tests and provide these kinds of results for a couple of years now, going back to some of our first YouTube appearances. I've tried to work on statistics, which is a new area to me, and thankfully I've had helpful collaborators in this space. But these are proofs that I've just been building the last couple of days, looking into very specific features that I've highlighted for years in my first gospel Lodlib, and that you can go examine, looking at some of my hand counts. But these are generally counts that are run based on statistical queries using Notepad++, but you can use any software you would like to do this. So I'm going to start out by looking at fulfillment verbs. So these results basically are all posted to Patreon, so people can go look at posts describing the results, as well as screenshots of the results, and evaluate whether they are accurate or not. So that's out there for scholars and the general public to examine. But I thought I'd give a little peek behind the curtain and look at how I'm deriving these results. So I'm just running these numbers in Microsoft Excel, having put together a columnar format. Often chi-squared results come in a grid pattern, but I wanted to change it to having all the calculations that are relevant for a specific edition of Marcion's Gospel in a single column, so that we could compare them side by side, all the different reconstructions. So we're looking at August Hahn, Theodor Zahn, Otto von Harnack, Jason Badun, Dieter Roth, Matthias Klinghardt, Andrea Nicolodi, and then my reconstruction. So those are the top columns. And as you can see here in the top left, what we're doing is comparing the Evangelion of Marcion with canonical Luke. So if we look, and we'll be looking at various features. So if we look at fulfillment words, so this in Greek would be the term pimplemi, which means to fulfill. It's a verb that means to fulfill. There's another verb in Greek that also means to fulfill, plerao, or to fill. And then there are nouns, for instance, pleroma, which can also mean to fill or to fulfill. What we find in Marcion's Gospels, this has a very low frequency, and that's across all editions. And yet in canonical Luke, it's present 25 times. So that's a pretty high occurrence. And if we look at really if we run the chi-squared calculations and then come up with a p-value, what we find is that every single reconstruction, Nicolodi's right on the cusp. Not quite there, but almost there in terms of statistical significance. But just today, I thought, I'd like to develop this more, and I've been working in this direction again for years. Going back to 2020, I developed a data set I called CENP, clear, explicitly not present. So those are basically all the passages in canonical Luke that Epiphanius, our main witness for the absent passages, what was absent in Marcion's Gospel, the material in canonical Luke that was clearly not in Marcion's Gospel, create a data set to isolate that as a separate sample. And when we run statistics of Marcion's Gospel, what scholars think are present in that versus what all scholars agree are absent from Marcion's Gospel, we really get, in many ways, the clearest comparison. We have basically a purely Marcionite sample and a purely canonical sample. And when we compare those, which I do right below here, and I just added this to Patreon just moments ago, is we find that the statistical significance using a chi-squared calculations is off the chart for every single edition. So ground truth is that fulfillment words have a statistically low frequency, statistically significantly low frequency in Marcion's texts compared to the canonical texts. Now, again, the Proto-Orthodox hypothesis folks have a nice little escape route for this, where they'll just say, oh, Marcion removed the scriptures, and then the scriptures, those references to the scriptures often have fulfillment language tied to them. Therefore, that explains this pattern away. But those same folks don't look at Marcion's gospel and take seriously that there are many positive quotations and allusions and paraphrases of the Hebrew scriptures, just not Septuagintal proof texts. What you find missing from Marcion's gospel are elaborate or careful word by word Septuagintal references, and often in a chain like format, along with associated fulfillment words. So, to scholars who are more objective about this, it looks very clear that a later redactor, a later editor, added a bunch of Septuagintal references into Luke that were not part of the early form that Marcion knew, and then added fulfillment language around that so that Jesus became the fulfillment of all of history and all of prophecy and all of that.